So the first source we're using is our textbook. And so we turn here to section 8.2, Italy, and the section on Giotto. We already looked at Giotto in terms of the style of painting that we saw on the Virgin and Child Enthroned. But now we're continuing down to the point where the authors are introducing this major project that Giotto worked on, which is the chapel in Padua. They write here, although Giotto was trained in the Florentine tradition, many of his principal works were produced elsewhere. So they're setting you up to know that he'd been in Rome for quite a while, and then he is called to Padua in northern Italy, soon after 1300, to paint frescoes for a new chapel being constructed at the site of an ancient Roman arena, explaining why it is often referred to as the Arena Chapel. So this can be a little confusing. Giotto creates frescoes at a site in Padua that many art historians will use the term Arena Chapel, but we can more clearly identify it as the Scrovegni Chapel. So here are some images, and this is the chapel itself right here on the bottom right. We call it the Scrovegni Chapel because it is the Scrovegni family's chapel. This old print shows you how it looked at that site when the Scrovegni family palace was still standing. This was their home, a giant home, so it's called a palace, and it was originally attached to this chapel, which had this little portico with pointed arches that you no longer see. And then you're looking inside the nave where Giotto paints the frescoes. And so the name Scrovegni is the most important one for you because it tells you who commissioned the cycle of frescoes. Giotto was called to Padua by a guy named Enrico Scrovegni, who had very good reasons to want to make something extraordinary for this chapel, which was designated as the place where he would be buried. Compare Enrico Scrovegni's chapel to the Sainte-Chapelle of King Louis IX. You see how plain and modest it is. This is an important contrast. Scrovegni did not want the gloriousness, the glamour, the beauty of all kinds of expensive stained glass. He did want something really special, but money was a sensitive issue for him because the Scrovegni family made their money as usurers. A usurer is someone who lends money at interest, and in Catholic Italy at the time, that was a venal sin. It would send you to hell. If we look inside the chapel, here we are over the doorway, looking at the fresco of the Last Judgement that Giotto paints, dividing the world into the saved and the damned on the right and the left, just as you saw in Romanesque portals. And if you look at these close-ups of the damned, you see these grisly representations of the torments of the damned in hell, depending on their various sins. Well, Enrico Scrovegni's father was said to have been sent to hell. In fact, he appears in Dante's poem, The Inferno, in the seventh circle of hell with the worst sinners. He was said to have been so greedy as a usurer that he, on his deathbed, legend has it, told his son Enrico to hide the key to the safe. You know, even when he's about to die, he's just worried about his money. And it's also said on his deathbed that when he breathed his last breath, there was a kind of malevolent laugh in the room with the the smell of sulfur, the smell of hell. It was said that Beelzebub, one of the tormenting demons from hell, was happy at Scrovegni's death. So that's an important psychological and religious context for why Enrico Scrovegni created this chapel and commissioned Giotto to make these frescoes. You see here in the Last Judgement painting that on the side of the saved, below Jesus's right side here, you have a donor portrait of Scrovegni. Here's Enrico on his knees. He's literally giving the chapel, the one that we're inside of, the one you just saw in the photograph that looks just like this. He's handing it over to the Virgin Mary. He's atoning for the sins of his family with this chapel and its paintings. And he is hoping that that atonement through art is going to bring him to the side of the saved. Keep in mind, this chapel is his burial chapel, and the artworks made for it include sculptures that are complements to Giotto's paintings. Those sculptures include the sculpture of the Virgin Mary, but also the sculpted form of Enrico Scrovegni, a sculpted portrait, his sarcophagus portrait, where he seems to sleep. He is actually sleeping in the apse across from the Last Judgement painting that I just showed you, hoping to be awakened at the end of time and brought to heaven. So there's a pretty heavy purpose driving him. And that purpose has to do with his soul and with the taint of money. And one important point about this chapel is how money is dealt with. In terms of money, the material used itself, fresco, is a very inexpensive material. And it's actually quite ironic, because there are lots of pieces of the wall design that look like expensive inlays that might have been done with marbles and colored stones, which would have cost a fortune and were very popular among the elites. But this chapel has none of that. Instead, it has faux marble panels, faux inlays, using inexpensive paint to create an illusion of some luxury, but purposely not flaunting money in the way that, say, the Sainte-Chapelle does. And this is interesting because the constraints that exist for the patron in terms of money, that he must be very cautious not to be flaunting money, those constraints actually give Giotto an opportunity to do something radically different, to not use glittering gold and sumptuous jewel tone stained glass, to not give us a painting that thrills our eye and dazzles us with ornamentation, but actually to quietly show us the depth of feeling, the emotion, and the human drama driving the biblical stories that are about redemption,